everybody, and thank you all for coming to this incredibly important demonstration today. My name is Jo Tully. I'm chair of the campaign against church ownership, control of church ownership of, I can get that right. The campaign against church ownership of women's health care. The point of the campaign is to draw attention and to stop the government handing over ownership and control of our new National Maternity Hospital to the Sisters of Charity in St. Vincent's, the Elm Park site. It is, we need to open this as a campaign by stating absolutely that we confirm the need for a new state-of-the-art National Maternity Hospital in Ireland. There is no question about that. The facilities for women and for babies are simply primitive. So that's not a question. We also are clear that it should be co-located. There's no problem with that. Our simple but incredibly important issue is who controls and who owns the new National Maternity Hospital. A decision was made some time ago that Holles Street, which is actually the National Maternity Hospital, but in fact it's a Catholic-owned National Maternity Hospital, and St. Vincent's should unite and have the new National Maternity built on the co-located site in Elm Park. The two hospitals went into negotiation about this about 3 years ago. Such was the strife inside that negotiation that a couple of years ago, Kieran Mulvey had to be called in to mediate between the two hospitals. Now, we're not sure what the difficulty inside those negotiations were. I'm quite sure ownership and control were fairly central. Anyway, Kieran Mulvey concluded his report about a year and a half ago, and his report was accepted by the government at the time, and he concluded that the new hospital should be built on a site owned by the Sisters of Charity in St. Vincent's, that it should be funded and constructed out of public funds to the tune of about 315 million, but that it should be owned and controlled by the Sisters of Charity who own St. Vincent's. Now, when this was announced about a year and a half ago, there was outrage, such that particularly women, but not only women, came onto the streets in thousands. Then a very clever step was taken by the Sisters of Charity. They announced a couple of weeks after that that they were going to step back from sitting on the board of the new hospital, that they were ceding all of their hospital empire, and they have a hospital empire to the tune of about the worth of 1 billion here in Ireland. They own St. Vincent's Private, they own the Dunleary St. Michael's and other institutions. They were also involved, and it's important to remember this, that they do not have a cool history in Ireland. They were involved in ownership of a number of the Magdalen laundries, etc. They have outstanding debts to a number of people injured in those institutions. I'm not going to take, I'm just giving a history of where this has come from. The point is that the issue of the independence of the new hospital is a serious issue. We have been dismissed, vilified and ridiculed in the media, particularly by the Ronan O'Mahony's of the world, by Simon Harris, etc. It has now come to date that Simon Harris, in a pathetic display, has pleaded with the new hospitals that if we don't ownership, we could at least have maybe a public representative on the board. That is the latest plea from our Minister for Health. It is pathetic. I'm handing now over to a number of speakers to outline the difficulties in this and the extremely important issue, because if this goes wrong, we will not get abortion services and other contraceptive services in our new National Maternity Hospital. I'm now handing over to Marie O'Connor, who is here somewhere. She is. Marie has done extremely important work. She is a journalist and healthcare correspondent. She is the author of 3 books on healthcare in Ireland and has done incredibly important research on the nature of this deal. So thank you, Marie.
The issue we're looking at here today is really, really simple. What the government is planning to do is to build a new maternity hospital and then give it to a private Catholic company to own and give it to another private Catholic company to run. This is absolutely unsustainable in 2018. This is actually a trickle-down model of healthcare we are sick of. We don't want it. Nobody wants it today, post-repeal. Ireland post-repeal is a different country. We need a different approach to healthcare. I mean, there's been so many denials about the religious ethos that will or will not be in this maternity hospital. As we all know, from the point of view of ethos, reproductive health care is critical. This is really at the cutting edge. And how can we be expected to believe that the new maternity hospital will be free of religious influence and control under the structure that's proposed? It's an absolute nonsense. And we learned this morning from the Irish Times, always first with the news of course, that we are not even going to own the shell of this hospital, not even the bricks. The bricks were going to be worthless anyway, but now we are not even going to own those bricks. Those bricks are going to be owned by St. Vincent's Healthcare Group. The Sisters of Charity still own St. Vincent's Healthcare Group. They still own their 3 hospitals, and the plan is for them to own the new maternity hospital. This is absolutely not good enough. We demand a new maternity hospital that is in public ownership and public control, 100%.
Marie O'Connor, thank you so much, Marie. She's done an extraordinary amount of important work around this. Our next speaker is Roisin Shortall. Roisin is a co-leader of the Social Democrats and has done incredibly good work on the Dáil around this issue, has raised questions and has thrown light on the issue. Thank you, Roisin.
Thanks, Joan. Hi, everybody. I just want to say from the beginning of this campaign, there have been 2 issues that have been central to it. And that is ownership and ethos in relation to our health services. And those issues remain the central issues involved in this campaign. And not much has changed over the last 2 years. The government, it seems, is wedded to the old model of healthcare, where they've been happy to outsource responsibility for the provision of health services to private entities, and in particular religious private entities, where they've been quite happy to hand over valuable hospital and school assets to religious interests and retain no control over those. And that has had all kinds of implications in relation to our failure to separate church and state in this country. And we're living with the serious legacy of that lazy approach to the provision of public services and the handing over of responsibility to religious. And we're seeing exactly the same now in relation to the National Maternity Hospital. In spite of what the Minister has told us, we know that last year the Minister commissioned a private deal to be done behind the scenes between 2 religious entities, St. Vincent's and Holles Street. And he did that without any reference at all to the public interest. This was a behind closed doors deal that was done, and it was only because people like you were aware of what was going on and started kicking up and took to the streets. And it's only because of that that there's been any kind of re-examination of this. But what has that amounted to over the last 2 years? Not very much, it seems. When it comes to the Minister's role in all of this, all he is saying now is that he is going to insist on a public interest director on the board of this new entity. Now just consider that. This is a new hospital funded by taxpayers. The running costs will be funded by taxpayers. And here we have our Minister for Health pleading for one director, one public interest director on the board. I mean, it is outrageous that that is the case. And we also know that there is no such thing really as a public interest director. All you have to look at is the banks, and the public interest directors appointed to the banks and we know that they did damn all in relation to the public interest. So there is no such thing as a public interest director. Directors are all bound by company law and have to serve the interests of the company. So there will be no benefit in that whatsoever. We also know that the idea of a golden chair is actually meaningless. It's worthless, and that's not going to do anything for us either. And what's happening then in relation to that delay? Again, no progress made over the last 18 months. You recall when you all took to the streets last year, the Sisters of Charity said that they were withdrawing from St. Vincent's. 18 months later, they're still there, you know, they haven't gone away. And let's not be fooled by what's being said in the media about this. The Sisters of Charity are still involved in St. Vincent's healthcare group, and there's been no change in that. We also know that from the Irish Catholic this week, they're saying that the Sisters of Charity will need the approval of the Vatican in order to divest themselves of that property, and that hasn't started yet. Equally, we know that Holles Street is keen to do this deal before the end of the year, even though they're not ready to do that. And in spite of Minister Harris's promises in relation to changing the composition of that board, that still hasn't happened. So the big fear is that the emphasis in the last few days in particular, we've seen a media blitz. We've seen the Irish Times devoting 2.5 pages to spin today. We've seen the RTE allowing the Master of Holles Street on for almost an hour to engage in that spin. We know that the chair of Holles Street, or the vice chair of Holles Street, has a slot booked on Sean O'Rourke on Monday morning. So there's a massive media pushback from all of the vested interests involved in this whole debacle. And we must resist that, because the big fear is that so much pressure will come on to wrap up this deal by the end of the year. The impression has been created that the issues have been dealt with, and we know that they haven't. So let's not be fooled by this. Let's keep up the pressure and ensure that we keep the battle going to ensure public ownership and a secular maternity hospital, and nothing else should be acceptable to us. Let's keep up the pressure then. Thank you.
Thank you, Roisin, for that. I just want to, before we go on to our next speaker, an incredibly important speaker and a very well-known speaker, I want to just re-amplify the demands from this campaign. And that is, we reject the proposed governance and ownership structure of the new maternity hospital. That's the first point. We reject it. We reject the concept of a public interest representative on the board. And lastly, we are calling on the Minister for Health to end the current negotiations with the St. Vincent Hospital Group and the National Maternity Hospital. And we propose that the state should own, build and manage the new maternity hospital on land that the state acquires, so that the new facility is secular in nature and will serve the public interest. That is the fundamental demand of the campaign. Our next speaker is Alva Smith, and really there is no need to introduce Alva. She has played a pivotal role in the Repeal campaign, and on and on and on. Thank you, Alva.
Hi everybody. Who would have thought when we repealed the 8th Amendment that we would have to come out and fight again to make sure that the Catholic Church is not running one of our maternity hospitals? There is a terrible irony in that. And let me say just 2-3 points in the 2 minutes I have. First of all, that history has taught us a very tough lesson in this country. We know that a symbiotic, hand-in-glove relationship between church and state is really dangerous for women, particularly for women having babies and women choosing not to give birth. And we know, therefore, that we must resist at all costs the inclusion of any sense of Catholic ethos in our publicly funded maternity hospitals. And as Roisin and Mary have both stressed, we need a secular hospital for a secular state. And the thing is, the people of Ireland are very, very clear about that. The second point is that, as you have heard also from Roisin and Mary, the forces behind the National Maternity Hospital are pouring money at the moment into a massive PR exercise. And part of that, which I have heard to my horror over the past week, is that those of us who are opposed to the building of our National Maternity Hospital at huge cost on property owned by the Catholic Church, that we don't care about the health and safety of women. We do care. Look around you. Look at us. We are the people who have fought for decades for the protection and respect for the health and safety and freedom and rights of women. And we will not relinquish that. We do know we need a new maternity hospital and that it is urgently required. But that does not require us to sacrifice the well-being and the rights of women now, but also the well-being and the rights of women in the future. And yet again, I say to you, I think of my daughter, I think of my granddaughter, I think of generations to come. So I ask you, what difference does 10 days make? Let us get this right. Let us not sign anything until we are 100% sure that the land on which this hospital is built belongs to the state, belongs to us. My last point, very quickly, as Roisin said, that land is still in the ownership of the Sisters of Charity. They said in 2017 they would relinquish ownership. They have not done that. They have not set up the new company that they promised. They have done very little, and anything they have done has been behind closed doors, in secret, in camera. We have not been given the full information. That is not acceptable. Transparency, clarity, ownership and governance by the state. One final point. I believe there is a solution to this, and it is not what the Minister is proposing, which is paltry, 99-year lease. What is that in the life of a nation? It is nothing. What? Nothing in the life of a nation. I'll say it again because it is true. And the issue of the governance remains. Where are the women on the proposed new board of the National Maternity Hospital? Where are we? We should be there, and we will be there. But the nuns benefited between 1934 and 1969 to the tune of over £5 million, now worth infinite multiples of that. They benefited from funding from the national sweepstakes, which enabled them to buy that land for £24,000 in 1934. Nowadays, all they have to do is to return to the state the gift they were given at that time and return that portion of land to the Irish people. I can tell you the full story. I don't have time. It'll be for another installment. But now we have to keep the pressure up, because there is no doubt pouring money into PR, ministers making last-minute deals. They know that the people are not content, that we will not accept this, and we will go on until our maternity hospital is our maternity hospital. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alva. Just before I call on our next speaker, a child would be able to understand that there is a major dilemma if we think that the Sisters of Charity, a Catholic congregation, is going to hand over its land and its control to a maternity hospital organised and run on a secular basis, whereby abortions are going to be practiced. It just is not going to happen. It doesn't fit. It can't happen. So our next speaker, so the fact that the state thinks it's going to, there's a credibility gap here. So our next speaker is Breed Smith from People Before Profit. Breed has done huge amounts on issues like this.
Thanks, Joe, and I want to congratulate the organisers of today's protest for doing this, but also for historically getting this protest mentioned at least 10 times on the radio this morning. I've never heard that before. 10 times on the radio and twice in the dial during the abortion debate. So you did well. Obviously somebody's worried about the fact that you're organising, arguing, articulating and putting the case for why this new maternity hospital must be publicly owned, publicly funded, publicly controlled, and the church need to get their hands off our ovaries, as we say, in those margins. I've just been speaking to a very good friend of mine, Deirdre Wadding. She came up from Wexford today, and she said she wouldn't miss this occasion because she was in a mother and baby home in Bessborough, run by the Sisters of Charity, and she carries the memory and the pain and the mark of that experience in her life, in her heart, and with her family. And she is insisting, as many women in this country who've gone through that experience will do, that the Sisters of Charity and the Church should have no more to do with the lives of women and their reproductive health or anything else to do with our health in the future. Could you imagine a state who's willing to spend up to 400 million, let's put a round figure on it, on a public hospital to be run in public interest, so they say, but then are leaving a very creative ambiguity about the historical role of the church in that hospital. Simon Harris stood up in the Dáil last week and under pressure made a statement that he's guaranteeing that there'll be no Catholic ethos in the hospital. Dr. Ronan, whatever her name is, from the Palace Street, O'Mahony, thank you, I'm always doing that. Dr. Ronan O'Mahony said again this morning that there'll be no Catholic ethos in that hospital. But I want to argue that creative ambiguity, we haven't seen a deal. They're talking about it for 2 years. They're leasing back the land instead of handing it back to the state. And they tell us they have a public interest director on the board. Well, that did us a lot of good when it came to the banks, didn't it? I don't think it's good enough. I think it's reflective of a government that is fudging on the question of the separation of church and state, that is coming under its own internal pressures, that there's mandarins in the Department of Health, that there's legacy throughout the hospital institutions, and that there is a wedding between the church and the state that absolutely must be subject to divorce. And we're the only people that can guarantee that that happens. I understand Sister Mary Aikenhead is in the process of being made a saint. Well, the best of luck to her, but she's not going to be a saint at the expense of Irish women any longer. Separate church and state, publicly owned hospital.
All right. Thank you very much, Breed, as usual, the story. We're sending around some buckets that we would like to see filled, because we have absolutely no money and this is an incredibly important campaign.
Just as a treasurer, I know what our funds are like. You know, I'm getting things printed on the Never Never, and people have been very good. Our first bit of funding we got was from the Coalition to Repeal the 8th, and Alvin Smith arranged for us to get some money, which we were able to book rooms and get our first printing. And Unite also gave us a cheque as well, but we really are running, you know, we're all volunteers, we're a campaign and we're running on nothing. So there's a few buckets going around there, just so that I can pay the bills and don't end up in trouble at the end of this. Thanks a lot, bye.
Thank you very much. I hope it's not going to rain. Next speaker is Walsh from an incredibly important campaign that is termination for medical reasons.